to the curve, where ideas take flight, blending tech.
Thank you for joining us on the Learning Curve. Today we're going to be talking about artificial intelligence on here. I'm Benjamin Wood, I'm the coordinator of digital learning here. Along with me I have Carl.
Hey, Carl Moan, digital learning specialist.
And today we want to focus and spend some time talking about what AI is.
Yeah.
What it is, what it's not, what its capabilities are, what its capabilities are not, really define what it is, and then spend some time talking about why it's important for us in education to really wrap our head around what this is now and what it means for our students now and for our students whenever they go into the workforce, when they go to college, all those kind of things. We're going to spend some time talking about the moral and ethical considerations of this. When and where do my students need to interact with it? How do they need to interact with it? And when do they not need to interact with it at all? So that's really what we're going to go through today on there.
Yeah. Well, because I think when you think about AI, when you think about artificial intelligence, you probably have some really visceral reactions to that. Our minds tend to go to films that we've seen that where AI becomes a scary thing, where the computers take over and you need the Terminator to come in and help you out because they're just going to destroy the world. And you know, as we look at what's really happening, what's going on, there are some real fears behind that.
Yeah.
The other fears that we're dealing with are, and we've heard this from teachers, so we know that people are saying this, are my students are never going to learn anything again. Creativity is dead. No one's ever going to be creative anymore. And these are some really very real fears that people have. We don't think that the computers are going to take over yet. Maybe they will. So just be nice to them. We don't think that's going to happen right now. But the real concerns are, how are my students using this? How are they learning to use it inappropriately? Because if we can learn to do anything, we can learn to do it wrong.
Yeah.
And
you know, one thing that happened early on, you know, AI has been out freely available since I believe last November.
it was 21 maybe?
21, okay, so about 2
21.
years.
So yeah, a couple years.
Our students learned it the day after it came out on TikTok and Twitter, and I know I don't want my students learning how to use a tool on TikTok and Twitter, because typically on those platforms, ethics and morals do not come along with that learning on there. And so I really feel like this is a great opportunity for us within education to really start leaning in and showing students the moral and ethical considerations of these tools so that they'll be better prepared. You know, one thing we're really going to try really hard not to do in this podcast, we're not really trying to change your mind one way or another. We just want to make sure that you feel validated in your feelings about AI, because no one really knows what this will look like in 10, 20, 30 years. We have some ideas and some practical considerations on there, but I do think the more that we talk about it, the better we'll all be dealing with and handling and coping and integrating this into our day-to-day, because I do think, you know, the genie's out of the bottle. There's no way to put the genie back in at this point, and you're going to see through some of the things we share with you, some of the things you see, you know, its integration has already reached a level within 2 years of mass adoption across the spectrum, from education to business to engineering to finance to all these things, and it's just going to continue to do that. So I think it's a really timely conversation to have, preparing both us as teachers, educators, administrators, and how we really shape this narrative to our students and really give them good practical ways to handle it.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important thing, is how do they handle it? Because they are going into a world where every company is using AI. They're using it to maximize efficiency in their own systems. They're using it to maximize profits, of course. I use tools like maps all the time when I'm driving, even to places that I know where I'm going, because they level up my understanding and efficiency of traffic patterns. And I'm trying to save myself as much time as I can. So I love that Google Maps will tell me where there's traffic. I like those things. Those are things that I lean into, you know. But it's even even simpler than that, because I've been using a spell check on Word documents for 20 years, probably at least, and maybe longer than that, which is a very simple form of artificial intelligence. It's identifying misspelled words and telling me so I can correct it.
It's giving suggestions.
And yeah, absolutely.
That thought partner.
And that's exactly right. And that's a key word that we want to lean into, is that AI becomes a thought partner for us, which might make it a little bit less scary. Maybe not, I don't know. But it might make it a little less scary. But I think it's really helpful when we think about what's really going on behind the scenes when we are talking about artificial intelligence. Because here's one thing. It's not actually intelligent.
Right.
It's
Give
not
too much credit
Yeah,
sometimes.
yeah. It's not alive. There's nothing living in this. It's a really, really fast computer pulling trillions of bytes of information in milliseconds. And that's what makes it seem smart. But it's really not. So when we think about AI, when we think about what all is happening in the background, we think about this idea, and you'll bring this up, I know, a large language model. What's really going on with artificial intelligence?
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a good place to start, because what happens too often with AI, when we converse with people about AI, concern is always, is it going to take over my job? Is it going to take over the world? Is it going to start thinking for itself? And we want to spend just a little bit of time talking about what it is and what it's not.
Which,
really,
before you get there,
yeah.
real quick, because I think that was great. Is it going to take over my job? When you think about technology, forever, technology and the concern has been, is this going to take over my job? And what happens is it actually causes transitions in the workforce. But as we retrain, as we learn new skills, even in education, and I know that can be, if you listen to our earlier episode about change, that can be angst filled,
Yes.
right? When we're having to change, when there's transition. But it always modifies things. It might not take over them.
And I think we as humans, we tend to do something. We like to put ourselves on the scale when we compare to something. But I liken it, and I know this is going to sound silly first, but think about it. When we first started riding horses, nobody thought, oh, well, if I can't beat a horse running, then I'm inferior. People just thought, hey, if I ride a horse, I can go a lot faster, a lot further, a lot sooner. And that was where we started adopting horse riding. And then when we went from a horse to a car, no one thought, well, if a horse can't keep up with a car, then the horses are obsolete. We just changed the mode in which we transported ourselves across things. That's what's happening with these tools. And again, like we said, we give too much credit to these tools sometimes because they're just that. They're just tools. But if we don't know how something works, we kind of get some mystification.
It's magic.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
If I don't know how it works, if I don't know how something works, if I don't know how my air conditioning changes hot and cold by using an exchange of gas and pressure and all those kind of things, it can look like magic. Like I hit a button on my thermostat and my house is better on there. But if we break it down to actually how it's working behind the scenes, then we can really understand both its potential and its limitations that are just inherent in there. We're going to be doing a few things. We have a website we're going to be sharing. If you're listening to this on audio, we're gonna try our best to kind of showcase what we're talking about. But we'll also have links that you can go to see this as you need. This is our AI website that we made here at Region 7. We've been working on this for 2 years, interacting, doing constant iterations on there. There's a few things we want to talk about first, though. Carl mentioned a large language model, and that is exactly what this is. I'm here to tell you the good news is it's not this. If you're looking on the screen there, it's not the Terminator. What we're we're in the world of generative AI. What all of science fiction and all the books, movies, directors, screenwriters, all those things have said for the last 200 years plus, anytime they're showcasing something that is AI, that is called generalized AI. And generalized AI is something that is self-aware and can replicate itself. We are in generative AI, and I'll be very candid, those words are so similar as to be frustratingly confusing. But generative AI simply means it can generate something new on there. It is not self-aware. It cannot think for itself. We have some great examples of where it's not very, very smart. It's fast, but it doesn't always get it right, and that's a key thing. One thing that's kind of would cause some mental dissonance sometimes is not only does it not always get it right, but because of its nature of wanting to generate something new, it's not always going to be accurate. And we've grown up in and around computers, and the expectation of when I use a computer, software program, a calculator, whatever it may be, I want it to be 100% accurate. That is the expectation we've had. And these tools are really interesting because the way that they're designed to allow it to create something new is also its Achilles heel, because when it is able to create something new, say like a creative writing assignment or something like that, it can make something very impactful. But because it needs certain leverage to make something new and impactful, it may get the math wrong sometimes. And that's something that we need to really talk about as we go through. Now, there's plenty of things that every week it seems like it's getting better and better. And there's specifically trained models to handle math equations and things like that. But that's something we need to know in the back end.
Right, I think in the background, this is, if we go back to, if you're frustrated or fearful or nervous with AI, and you said this a moment ago, you didn't reference this tool in particular, but when we think about how we're accessing information, even when we go into Google, even when we do web searches, we tend to trust the information that the program is giving us, that the machine is giving us, but we still have to vet the source. We still have to say, where is this really coming from? Is this a valid source? And that's something we've had to do, honestly, for generations when you think about research. If you're going back to looking up books in the library, just because somebody wrote it didn't mean that it was a quality source, because who knew where they were getting their information. And so when we think about how AI is working, and as BJ is going to explain kind of the large language model, what's going on in the background, when we think about how these things are working, it's doing the same stuff that we've always been doing. It's just doing it incredibly fast.
Right. And has access to so much
all
more
of this
than
information.
we would have the time.
Right.
And I think that's the key thing.
Yeah.
It's a time-saving device.
Yeah.
It can mimic what we would do next. So kind of to go along with that, I asked Carl, hey, I need you to write a 5-page paper about platypuses. Most likely, Carl is not a platypus expert. He's not coming to this assignment with any pre-knowledge that he can lean from. So what would be your first step if you're going to write that paper?
Yeah, so I would go and I would look up what in the world is a platypus, first of all.
Yeah. And you look that up, in Google.
Yeah, I would probably do a web search
papers,
because it's just fast.
Right, do a web search. You'd look at peer-reviewed journals, dissertations, all those kind of things. What would you do then?
Yeah, so I'm going to collect all of that. I'm going to find the best sources, the ones that I trust the most, the ones that seem to validate one another, and I'm going to put that information together. I'm going to collate that, and I'm going to find an outline kind of that makes sense when I'm talking about what a platypus is, and maybe what its habitat is, and perhaps its diet and its predators and breeding patterns, all of those things, and I'll put all of that stuff together, and I'll put my reference list, and then that would be my paper. That's how I would kind of work.
And if I said MLA or APA,
Yeah.
you get all that. We'd probably go to the websites to help us with our citations, because who's going to type all
Why
that
not?
out, right?
Yeah.
No. And all those things that you just did for that paper is exactly what the large language model will do. If I prompt it and I type in, I need a 5-page paper over platypuses, I need 5 factual, and that's a keyword, factual references, and I need it to be written in APA or MLA or Chicago format. What it's going to do is it's going to look at that prompt, and based off of the words that I've chosen, it's going to go through that task. It's going to do everything Carl would have done. It's going to look at anything and everything that references platypuses that it can access. And the large language models now can access anything online that's not behind a paywall or behind a sign-in wall. So can't get your Netflix, can't get your bank account, can't get your Facebook, but anything that is publicly available online, it can reference and access. And so it's going to go in and it's going to look at everything that involves platypus. Dissertations, peer-reviewed journals, Wikipedia, news articles, websites, whatever may have that, and it's going to look at all of those, and it's going to look to see and check validation between the two. It's going to say, hey, is this saying this? Is this saying that? Are platypus animals that have 6 legs or 4 legs? It's going to get all the information. It's going to also see that I said a 5-page paper using a certain style, so it's going to then pull all that data of all these places, all this information, going to look at all the best practices writing in Chicago format or MLA, whatever I may have chosen. Get all that together. It's going to ingest that data, and then it's simply going to go in and it's going to write the paper, and it's literally going to take the basis of knowledge that it's formed, and it's going to look and think what word should go next, again and again and again, and it's going to create that paper. It's going to make the citations. It's going to be in the proper format, all those things, and it'll do that in milliseconds. I mean, behind the scenes, they're doing billions and trillions with a T now of in-depth calculations and looking through and checking and all those kind of things, and it does it incredibly fast. One thing that we do in our workshops is we have our participants look up red-nosed bats, and they'll do it both online and they'll do it in ChatGPT or one of the other models. What's interesting is that if ChatGPT can't find anything about red-nosed bats, if you didn't say factual or didn't say, well, what are some other terms we could throw in there?
Verified,
right.
and this is going to come into when we talk about
Yeah.
prompts. But yeah, the key words that we're looking
Yeah.
for, this needs to be actual valid data.
If I didn't tell the model, if I didn't tell the generative AI that I wanted factual information, if it can't find it, it will make it up because it lacks context. That's another place where we give it way too much credit. It doesn't understand the human condition and it doesn't understand context. So if I give it a fake animal and it can't find information and I didn't say factual, it may think I'm wanting to do a creative writing assignment, and it will very well make that paper on there. So it isn't smarter than us. It does the exact same steps we would do. It just can do it exponentially faster. And I think that's really key of understanding and knowing how it works.
Yeah, well, and I think where we need to kind of shift our thinking and understand not only what's happening, but how we can make the machine work for us. Because that's the thing. When you consider this as a tool, when you think about this as perhaps just a sped up version of what humans can do and how we like to talk about AI as a thought partner, it all comes down to how I'm asking the machine to do what I want it to do. And so when BJ was talking about the process of writing a paper, we have to use key words like valid, like truthful or factual, or any of these words, verified, any of these words. And then we have to be very explicit and specific about what we're asking it to do. And so when you think about the difference between using ChatGPT and using Google, when I do a Google search, usually the more generalized the search is, the more results I'm going to get. And then I use my own discernment to decide which which results I want to use, right, for my paper. But I made a very general post. I'm like, what are platypuses? And it would then give me, 2 billion articles or however many articles there are on platypuses. The reverse is the truth when we're using AI. Because if I use a very generalized statement, like you just said, it can give me some factual information, but it can also give me just whatever it finds about somebody who wrote a story.
Right.
Anybody who wrote a story about platypuses, it can pull from that might be fiction, and all of a sudden you've got a talking platypus in your research paper, which I would think isn't true. And so the better I get at crafting prompts, the better the AI model is going to be at returning what I'm looking for, and really in high quality. And so the concern then becomes, if our students start doing this, then they're never going to do any of the work themselves. And some of that, I feel like, to me, and I'll just speak for myself, some of that for me brings up some emotion, because I'm like, I had to spend hours in a library. I want them to have to do it too, right? But
and with that, so part of my background, I've spent about 20 years in the Adobe products, and this is well before AI. It frustrates me that every new edition of an Adobe product, Photoshop, Illustrator, After Effects, and things, every new tool they bring out makes me more and more redundant in my prior knowledge. And I have to fight that feeling that you're saying right there. This notion that now Adobe has recognized, hey, I found a faster way to do the same thing, so I'm going to make that a tool. And to me, that means, well, all of the work I did in college, all the work I did in building up my skill set is now not necessary anymore. And instead of seeing it as, now I have this tool that will save me hours and hours of time. But it is that I have a pride and ownership of my knowledge.
Absolutely.
And I find myself the same thing with AI sometimes. Well, it's taking the pride of ownership away in the process. But I've got to remember that it's giving me a tool that can make me more efficient and faster, so I can spend more time doing the things I want to do, more times on the things that are important. And that's interacting with my students and encouraging them, motivating them, and all those things. Right?
Yeah, well, yeah, because I remember being kicked out of the library because they were closing the thing, and that feels like a rite of passage almost that students have to have, and maybe that's less likely to occur. But, and this is where the shift came for me. Because when I started thinking about all the effort that went into me creating a good prompt to get the AI to return something valuable, I'm like, man, that was some real critical thinking I had to do. I had to actually think about what I wanted, think about how to get what I wanted, think about how to say how to get what I wanted, and think about the questions that I had to create that are going to lead the machine to do what it was I needed it to do. That's a lot of mental process going into that.
And I'm sure it wasn't a one-off. I'm
No,
sure
not
it was
at all.
an iterative
Yeah.
process.
Yes.
with that.
And that's the key right there, is learning is always iterative. And so if we can teach our students to be good thinkers, and that right there I think is the key point, to be critical thinkers and to be a problem solver, because when I'm getting these different results, I'm like, well, that's not exactly what I need. So then it just becomes a process of going, all right, well, how do I ask it better? You know, if I didn't get the results I want, that means that I just didn't ask the question well. I just need to ask the question better. And I think that anytime we can make our students into good questioners, good question askers, I think we've really leveled up their cognitive abilities, and I think that's really part of what we're trying to do. Yeah.
Well, and I think too, especially for us, when we talk about this tool, we talked about kind of how it works a little bit, talking about why we should necessarily use it as educators, as administrators. What's the end goal? What's the benefit to us? And I think we've kind of touched on a few things, but I think one thing it provides is it provides speed and access to data that we would struggle finding all the time, or it does it in a concise manner to help us. So, and one thing you mentioned there just a second ago, one thing we'll talk a little bit more when we talk on the student side, how students will interact with this, but one thing we've got to remember with all this is that AI provides a framework, provides a template. It provides some form, fashion, something, and you'll see this in some of the other podcasts we've done over AI, but it's never the end result. So
Right.
AI is the start, not the end. Because what AI can do in a phenomenal way is access data, come up with ideas, help you be a thought partner to you. What it doesn't know is it doesn't know you. It doesn't know your role. It doesn't know the resources at your disposal, and it doesn't know your students and both of the and the challenges that they may have on there. And so anything we do, anything we interact with, we've got to remember all those things, and we've got to make sure that we see it as this is a start of the process, not the ending of the process. This is a helper, but not a replacement for me or my work or my effort in there.
Yeah, so you as a teacher, you're not going to lose your job.
No.
Because
Yeah,
it's
definitely.
still so vitally important that you provide not just information, and I think that's where we sometimes get hung up as teachers, is we're the ones who have all the information, right? We're the ones who are supposed to make sure that we pass this information on to our students. When maybe that role is shifting a little bit, which honestly I think is good news. Because as a history teacher, even though history is all in the past, I can't possibly know everything that there is to know about history. And my students were always asking me questions that I didn't have an answer to, because they would find some obscure fact about somebody that was actually kind of interesting, but I didn't know. And so when I stopped thinking of myself as the one who gave all the information and started thinking of myself as one who was a facilitator, one who was a guide, one who was a co-learner in the classroom, that really changed the dynamic. And this is where it becomes so valid and so important for us, that your students still need you. They still need you as a person, someone who can listen to them, someone who they can bounce ideas off of, someone who can guide their thinking as they're working with all of the new tools, who can help them become discerning, because that's such a key thing, especially with AI. We have to vet everything. We have to be very discerning with everything that's coming out. And it's difficult. It's difficult for a 45-year-old to be discerning, much less a 14-year-old, And so we become that model, we become that guide, we become the person, and people are valuable, and they're necessary. And so you are never going to be replaced.
Well, kind of with that, let me pose a question to you, and you be counterpoint. I mean, if ChatGPT can now pass the bar exam in the 90th percentile, will it replace lawyers?
Yeah, no, it couldn't possibly. Even though it can come up with information which can be helpful to lawyers, it can't argue the point, right? You can't, and you've used this in our workshops before, right? You can't just stick a computer on the table and let it be the arbiter between two dissenting parties, right? It can't win over a jury because it can't emote. And even the best voices that are out there, and there are some great AI voices, they still lack that human condition, the context to be able to emote, to convince people, to turn a jury one way or another, and or even to be an effective arbitrator. between two parties. It can't do that.
And just in the way it can't replace lawyers, won't replace lawyers, so too will it not replace educators.
Right.
Because all of the very things that we expect a lawyer to do or handle or be within that role are the same things that we are, as educators are called to do. The thing with this is it is a phenomenal tool, but it will never replace the human connection necessary to motivate our students. Because we all know, we all went through COVID, we all saw how kids reacted, and even though kids had access to anything and everything online that was K through 12 learning, just because they have access to it doesn't mean that they learn it. And
Right.
it's because the missing key is the teachers. It's that essential motivator, the surrogate mother and father, all of the things that we bring into the classroom that an AI tool just cannot mimic. Even if it could mimic, it cannot provide with authenticity, and students understand that innately. And that's why we're the biggest deciding factor in the classroom of whether or not students have success. On there. And no AI model, as impressive and cool as they may be, is going to ever really able to contend with that. And so what I love about this, and truly this is something we've seen play out for the last 2 years, AI is making us more relevant than ever in the work that we do and the interactions we have with our students, not the opposite. And that's always the concern is, well, there's a new tool, there's a new technique, there's a new technology, will it replace me? And I'm really excited to say it won't. It doesn't have the capability. If anything, it will enhance us in a lot of ways in our roles and what we do.
So we're going to run short on time here, so we need to kind of wrap this episode up. But before we do that, we want to lean into one other thing before we close this episode out, because we still haven't answered the question of how do I fight this in my classroom? How do I fight my students just using this to do the least amount of work possible? Because they will. They just will. The path of least resistance. But to be fair, that's what all of us want to do, right? All of us want to follow that. And so
let me just ask you, do you cut your grass with a sickle?
I do not.
So
no. I use power tools because I'm trying to save time and energy. And that's a great analogy. So we do have some thoughts, and this is not the only time we're going to talk about AI. This is a really big thing, and so we will address this more and more as we go through this podcast series. But how can we create assignments? How can we create opportunities, learning experiences that are potentially AI resistant?
The biggest thing, we always like to use the example of the calculator. The concern is our students are going to use this cheat. When the calculator showed up in the math class, math teachers threw up their hands and said, our students are never going to learn math. They have something that'll just give them the answer. Ooh, this is done. How are we going to do this? And what we've seen bear fruit over the last 30, 40, 50 years is that not only has the calculator not just given them the answer, but we've actually been able to teach higher levels of math sooner in the curriculum because of that. And math teachers did a masterful pivot that we all can take advantage of when we deal with AI. Math teachers started realizing, they said, I frankly don't care that you got the right answer. I care how you got the right answer. I'm going to grade you just as much, if not more, on the way that you showed your work than the actual product itself. And I think that is so key for us going into the world of AI. Now, our students have access to tools that can generate items and make a product in a second. And so we have to now, as educators, we now have to have the expectation that AI will be involved in some way, whether we want to or not, whether we block it at school or not. Our students are very crafty. From time to time, they have access to internet at home, they have a phone, they have a sibling, they have a relative that will show them this, will interact with that. So our assumption is that the AI is going to be ever present. And we see it integrated in all the tools. Microsoft is integrating it right into Windows through Copilot. That's ChatGPT behind the scenes. They're integrating it into their Word, Excel, all those things. Google is doing Gemini. Gemini is now integrated in your search. If you search something, the first thing that pops up now is an AI-generated response on there. And so it is now going to soon be ubiquitous across the platform. So we have to assume that AI will be involved in the part. And so now we all have to start shifting from product to process. So now I'm not really concerned so much about a paper anymore. Not to say that paper writing is dead or it's not there. I think it's going to be actually more impactful from this. But with this, now I'm not really going to grade a 5-page paper anymore. If I'm an English teacher, I'm going to say, write me a paper. Carl would write me a paper. He brings it in. He takes it, whether AI written or not. I'm going to feed that into an AI model and say, write this at a higher lexile level. The next day, I'm going to give it back to Carl, and I'm going to say, okay, today we are going to dissect these papers. You're going to highlight the differences. You're going to answer several key questions as to why one is better, what word choice was used, how was it, which one defined the debate or the item or the idea behind the paper better. We're going to have those kind of discussions, and we're going to talk about this to the students. Say, look, both of these are your idea. The core idea of your paper is the same. Why is one better than the other? And I'm not grading on the paper they turned in. I'm grading on the responses they give when they deconstructed those papers. And I think that can be really powerful, because I think we're still forcing them, the student, to interact and talk about the way in which we write on there. And so we're focused now on the process, not the product on it. Again, reiterating that idea and that notion that AI is the start, not the end. We have to remember that this is never going to know our interactions, our resources, our students, and all those kind of things. And so if we lean into process over product, and we understand that AI is just a starting point, not an end block, I think that can help us a lot.
Yeah, and I think that's really valuable to consider, that it's going to be a percentage of what gets done.
Mm-hmm.
I think that we've got some strategies, and we'll talk about some of these as we go through the podcast, of when to use it or when not to use it, how to use it effectively, how to prevent ineffective or inappropriate use. We're not going to completely do away with it. We simply can't. But I love the idea of process over product. I love the idea of having presentation being a part of every single project, every single piece of work that you do. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be a formal 15-minute speech, but it does mean that your students have to verbally speak what they know. They have to be able to communicate that. And that's a really valuable skill anyway. Almost every class in the learning standards, public presentation is a part of those learning standards. So it's not like you're going away from your standards. You're hitting on those every single time. And I love the when we begin to require our students to say something. And there are ways to do this, that you don't have to stand everybody up in class and do it. I mean, there are ways that you can record video where they're still talking, where that presentation becomes a part of it. And I think that's a really valuable thing to think about, the process of learning rather than the product that we get. And I think that's going to be, as we transition to move, that's going to be even more and more valuable.
And I think too, one thing that I'm so excited about, I know Carl is with AI, is that what this does for project-based learning, what this does for blended learning.
Yes.
I mean, if you could expand a little bit on that here in a second. But I'm so excited, because we now as educators have a tool that can make the heavy lift that is both of those so much easier and so much more impactful. I mean, that just personalizing the learning using AI is just phenomenal.
And I think that's really, and this is where we'll end for today. But when we think about blended learning, when we think about project-based learning, the last 5 years I was in the classroom, I got to do a project-based learning class. And the amount of work on us, the teachers, was tremendous, especially at the beginning of creating all of the projects and asking all of the questions. But what we saw from our students was much higher levels of comprehension, much higher levels of cognitive process, of having to think, of critical thinking and problem solving. And that came because we required our students to choose how they were going to demonstrate mastery. And the problem on the teacher side is that took a lot of work at the front end. And AI can help you as a teacher become so much more efficient in creating personalized learning opportunities. And anytime, and there's a process that I go through when I think about that. It's creating opportunities for students to choose, right, where they're going to go, how they're going to turn in work, what they're going to what they're even going to present, all of that, right, where that's the process. They're going to choose it, which gives them ownership over that learning, which is so important, because if it's mine, I take care of it much differently than if it's not mine. And then helping them find their voice and expressing their voice through how they're learning and what they're doing, which really creates, there's an authenticity behind that. And that's where this becomes really important, is the learning becomes much more authentic, becomes much more relevant to them. And anytime we can make learning relevant, anytime our students can see the connection to real life, they're much more likely to be engaged with that.
Do you mind kind of expanding just briefly on the change in your role in the classroom as a teacher through that process? Because I think that's really key with this.
Yeah, that was honestly the best part, and that's what made those 5 years the most fun that I had in education, because I stopped being the one who was responsible for communicating all the information. I began to really just be a facilitator. I began to be a partner. I spent most of my time walking around the room just talking to people. I just got to hang out at my kids' tables. They were working at tables. I just got to sit down and just say, hey, what are you working on? What are you learning? And then have them explain what they're going through. And the other thing that did that was so valuable, in the process of me just talking to them, I got to learn where they were getting it wrong, and I got to redirect them. And so it was in process formative assessment and modification of instruction, which is, everybody does data-driven instruction. That's exactly what it was. It was data-driven instruction, but it was based on in-the-moment data, and I could immediately change the direction and help them refocus. And because of that, I've developed better relationships with my students, where I wasn't this authoritarian just telling them things. They learned more, and we were able to see some tremendous growth in our kids over those years.
And Carl's being very modest, but when he says growth and achievement there, I mean, this equates to STAR scores at the time. I mean, this was a exponential growth in the performance of these students. So while you were doing project-based learning for the benefit of your students directly in that, not only did you get the benefit there as the teacher and the educator, but your students also excelled.
Absolutely.
And these were students from all backgrounds,
all learning levels, right? Absolutely. They were
So
not just the highest students.
So I mean, it's just amazing, and it's one of those where we lament sometimes seeing the power of AI. We wish, well, if we had just had this, what could we have done in the classroom with it? And that's what's so exciting about living in this time period with our with access to these amazing tools and what we can do with that. So you'll see some of that bleed over in some of our other podcasts as we show tools and those kind of things. We're excited about that.
Yeah. So again, this is the first of several conversations about AI, and this is just the world that we live in, and so this is what we talk about all the time. So we appreciate you hanging out with us, and as we kind of go through this, we'll highlight some tools, some specific AI tools that we'll talk about that we think can make you more efficient, and hopefully this will lead you to maybe being a little less afraid. It's okay. It's okay to still have some trepidation. That's all right, because anytime, if you listened a couple of weeks ago, change is difficult, and anything new is hard. And so maybe just a little less trepidation and maybe a little more enthusiasm with kind of diving into the tools and seeing how they can help you out. So, all right. Well, thanks so much for joining us, and we will see you next time.
Welcome to the Curve, where ideas take flight. Blending tech and teaching, sparking insight. From digital tips to stories untold, we're here to inspire, to break,